Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to a fantastic webinar today, Business Risks and Protections, hosted by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Dale Sky Jones, and I am the Chancellor of Oaksterdam University, the first and longest running training for the cannabis industry in the world, and I'm excited to be your moderator today. We are here because the Department of Cannabis Regulation has provided the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance, or BLC, program to assist equity entrepreneurs in the city of Los Angeles with obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. Please visit cannabis.lacity.gov for more announcements on the ever-improving BLC program for live webinars with different and new subjects and experts, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools that you can download and use, as well as links for accessing expert consultants in the BLC coaching program. This connects you, applicants, with seasoned cannabis subject matter experts. I'll be dropping a live link in the chat in just a moment. One of our amazing coaches that you can talk to on your own is Miss Lauren Vasquez, our instructor today. So if you want to have that one-to-one interaction, you can find her on that link as well as self-directed online education on important topics related to running a successful cannabis business through the BLC's learning management system, which is usually referred to as the LMS. As part of the city's social equity program, DCR has launched this BLC LMS portal where you can access recorded webinars, online courses, and digital resources made especially for social equity applicants and licensees in the city of LA. I highly recommend that you take this course and explore more in the LMS if you have not done so already. And before we get started, we're just going to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's website in the LMS that I just mentioned. So yes, it will be recorded and you can find it after editing. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. So while your camera and audio functions will not be available during the session, you will be able to see and hear all the experts and chat with us through the open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. And also we have a Q&A box. Now, that's an excellent spot. If you have the question, I promise someone else has the same question. So we'll be gathering and responding to your questions throughout this presentation, and we'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the very end of today's webinar. And please do use caution when sharing personal information. This is a public forum, and keep your questions focused on today's topic. You are encouraged to utilize that Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Finally, please note that today's content was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles. This is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code, nor constitute legal advice. Even though Lauren is an attorney here in California, she is not your attorney. So if you do have specific questions outside of today's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during normal business hours, Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4, to speak with a DCR representative. And you can also access low and pro bono legal assistance. So I'll be dropping all these links in chat as we get started. And now it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce today's subject matter expert, Lauren Vasquez. Lauren is a pioneering cannabis attorney and activist who has worked for nearly 2 decades to end prohibition and advance alternatives to the failed war on drugs. She has also led state and local campaigns and advised numerous cannabis companies and organizations. Lauren graduated from Santa Clara University School of Law in 2009 and entered private practice in 2011. That same year, she became an instructor here at Oaksterdam University, and in 2015, briefly served as the National Deputy Director of Communications for the Marijuana Policy Project, the organization that led and won the historic Colorado legalization campaign. In 2016, Lauren was the senior advisor and statewide outreach manager for the successful Prop 64 campaign that that legalized cannabis here in California, and she now assists cannabis businesses with licensing and regulatory compliance and enjoys helping people achieve their cannabis dreams. Please help me welcome Lauren Vasquez and go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So today we're going to cover some really important topics because, yes, I love to help you achieve your cannabis dreams. But if you put your heart and soul into this and lose everything, that's not good. And unfortunately, it's very common. So what we're going to cover is first, just an overview of all the things that your business can face. So some are obvious, some are less obvious. You're definitely dealing with regulatory issues. That's, something many of you are already familiar with. But then there are legal liabilities that you may not be as familiar with, and strategies for protecting yourself from those liabilities. So that's what we're going to cover. First are risks and threats. And so many of you are maybe already familiar with this. So when it comes to regulatory compliance, there are serious fines and penalties. The fines can be quite costly. The fines can be levied on a day-to-day basis and per infraction, and so they can add up quite quickly. And that's if you get to keep your license. So some violations can cause you to have your license suspended or revoked. And at the state level in California, if you've had a cannabis license previously revoked, it can prevent you from getting another license. So people sometimes think you can just hop skip to a new company, but if you're violating regulatory compliance, that's going to follow you where you go at the state level. And so then we have legal liabilities. The one that everybody really, thinks about in the cannabis industry still is criminal prosecution. We're facing federal prohibition, so that is still a liability that is there. But then there's also civil liabilities, and we also have business disputes. And it's not just your business versus another business. It's your business versus you. And especially with the equity folks, all the equity licensees, and the way that your business has to be structured, and the fact that you need investments, and there are predatory partnerships and people out there. There are a lot of people who are getting pushed out of their own business. And so we'll talk about some ways to prevent that. I have been coaching for the DCR, and in just the last couple of weeks, I've talked to two different groups of people who are the equity applicants, and their business partners are just shutting them out entirely. So I would say of all of these things, when it comes to regulatory compliance, the state, they're overwhelmed, but the city, they're the ones that are more on top of things. They're the ones that are doing the inspections. They're the ones that are licensing other activities, other local types of licenses, like food licensing from the Department of Public Health and the business division. So at the local level, they're the ones that are really keeping an eye on you, but there are also the state enforcement agencies. And so with the legal liability, the feds are there. And if you violate criminal laws, you can still be punished in the state of California, even if you have a cannabis license. You have to, act within the rules. So this is what you're dealing with as a cannabis business. And each one of these can be overwhelming in and of themselves. So if you've got your license and you're operating, cannabis compliance is bananas. This is every single day. Y'all are dealing with these things, and it's all day, every day, and very easy to slip up and make mistakes, or just things go by that you don't realize. So the thing that we're all doing with from seed to sale is track and trace, and you got to do the metric training, and you got to keep it up to date. If certain things happen, like if there's an inventory loss, you have to report that within 24 hours. Some reportings within 48 hours. And so those penalties for missing those time deadlines can be quite extensive. And then just all the other operating requirements that you're aware of, they all come with fines and penalties for not following the rules. So lab testing, that's a big one. Packaging and labeling, you know, those rules are quite extensive when it comes to child proofing and reporting the test results onto the packaging and making sure that it just all meets the requirements. And then something that most people are not quite aware of is there are mandatory reporting requirements. So for example, if there are changes in the business address, or there are changes in the business owner's addresses, or changes in the business owner, or you want to make changes to the way that your premises is set up, you've submitted diagrams. And so if you're going to make changes, you have to report that. Sometimes with mandatory reporting, it's just the reporting. Sometimes if you want to make modifications, you have to get pre-approval for those. So almost everything you do has to be monitored and potentially reported. Um, and then we have advertising rules. We have the state advertising rules, not marketing to children, but then the types of markets that the data that you use to analyze whether or not you're marketing to children, and how you have to have your license numbers on the advertisements. So just there's so many things. We have regulations for all the text messaging advertisements. I know people who've gotten in trouble with that because they just start texting their customers, and no, you have to get permission. And when you do get permission, you have to provide opt-out options. It's just like, oh, I thought we were just texting our customers. Like, no, there's so many rules that go into all of this. And some of it is just to keep track of what's going on with the business. And a lot of it is intended to protect consumers, protect customers, and also to protect the environment as well. So, depending on your license type, there's a lot more requirements. Cultivation is going to have land use requirements. It's got all the batch set up for the track and trace, and then you have distributors, and they have their own requirements, retail, manufacturing, and you got to use specific kinds of spatulas. There's for each license type, just not only within the cannabis regulations at the state level and then at the DCR, but also just general regulations, general food regulations, general environmental regulations. So all of these things really need to be monitored on a daily basis. And so what you should do is should set up in your SOPs a sort of daily kind of checklist. Like, were there any changes in this today? Do we need to make changes to that? Did we get a notice from any government agency? When do we need to reply to that notice? And if it's just you in the business, it's a lot easier to keep track of. But once you start having staff and managers and people on the floor who are maybe not aware of all these things, at least have some sort of checklist or way at the end of the day to report if certain activities have occurred, so you could take the appropriate action based on what the regulations require. Oh, pay your taxes. We can't forget that one. That's going to get you into trouble the fastest and easiest way. So you have your local taxes, you have your local cannabis taxes, and then you have your state taxes, cannabis taxes, and sales tax. And as far as sales tax go, and potentially some of the other taxes, these do follow you. So I'll mention that in a little bit. See. So penalties, as I mentioned, very expensive fines. Some of the fines, there's a DCC, the fine for just not turning over the information within the time period that they request, which could be 24 hours, is a $20,000 fine. Now, there's a lot of discretion. You get notices, you get the opportunity to correct, you get the opportunity to appeal if your correction wasn't sufficient. But that's a lot. That's a lot for you to deal with, and we want to avoid those things. But just to kind of give you an idea, this is from the DCC. This is their penalty chart. And so you can see that it's divided up into the levels of violation, the type, minor, moderate, and serious. And the fine is a range. So again, there's some discretion involved there. But first off, if you're a licensee engaged in activities with an unlicensed person, very serious, $5,000 fine range. And then if you're operating without your license after it's been revoked, and then here we've got one that's relevant to cultivation. If you're using a water source that's not permitted, that's a very serious violation. So just to kind of give you an idea of the framework of how the penalties are set up. All right. So now we go to your legal liabilities and think of this as just your lawsuits, people getting sued, you suing people, people suing you. Um, so we have general business liability. This is probably what comes to mind to most people. It's like, oh, if someone trips and falls in your store and sues you for getting injured, someone gets hit by your delivery driver while crossing the street. So that's just general business liability, and that's what your general business liability insurance is going to cover, and you're definitely going to need insurance. Um, there's also personal liability, and that goes back to what I mentioned about the taxes. This is where you personally can be held liable, in addition to or separate from the business. And usually it's if you do something very intentional and egregious, like if you are at work and you intentionally hit that person while driving the delivery vehicle, that can arise to giving you personal liability. Because generally, well, businesses are liable for what their employees do, and employees are protected by the business. But if you go and do something egregious, you can lose that and be personally liable. And then when it comes with the taxes, it's just a rule at the state level for all sales tax, not just cannabis, that the business owners can be held personally liable. So even if you leave the business, if you close the business, if you leave behind a tax debt, the CDTFA, they can come after you. Talking to a couple of people about this right now because they got into a business dispute. The people they were partnered with didn't pay the taxes, and then they got a notice from the CDTFA, hey, you need to give us this information and pay your taxes.
So
And
so to if we can unpack that, because we do have an attendee who's asking a question about
Mhm.
that, Lauren, and if we can just spend a couple minutes on this, because the question, excellent question, is there any oversight for other entities involved in cannabis but not license holders, such as predatory landlords or partners? And then
um,
they have a follow-up.
I don't see the question in the chat, so maybe it didn't come through to me.
It's
Sorry.
in the Q&A box.
Okay. So no is the quick answer. There's, civil liability law. You could sue a landlord, but a lot of times what they're doing, it's predatory. It's not necessarily illegal or a breach of contract. Um, and so in a lot of instances, no, you don't really have much protections. Um, I I think we're starting to see at the local level a little bit of oversight, and it is intended to be an oversight where like the equity applicant has to own 51%, but people are, being presented with forms that they're signing and being either told nothing or being told incorrect information, being misled, and so they're signing off on things, and you may be held to that. So it's tough. There really isn't any oversight, and you're going to fall back on just, general having to file lawsuits. I'm working with some folks right now that are doing cease and desist letters. But if you don't have the capability to pay to file a lawsuit to back that up, it won't necessarily go very far. But that is usually the first place people start. Um, and yeah, the tax, you could be stuck with one person I was looking at was like over $1 million in sales tax that hadn't been paid that they were looking at coming him after him for. But then of course he never made any money from the business because the distributions were never given to him, and he was never even involved, treated like he didn't exist. So that's pretty terrifying. And how do you prevent that? Well, we'll get
That
into
is my next
it.
question.
How will we
Yes.
prevent? We'll get into that. That's most of the class. So, you're kind of along the lines. There are accounting and financial liabilities. So that's what's going to get you sued, meaning that you owe people money or they owe you money. And then products liability, employer liability. We'll get into these in a little bit more detail. So again, general liability. That's if somebody gets injured on your property, if you damage somebody's property. And then business disputes with a breach of contract. You don't necessarily get liability. You get sued for every mistake that you make is usually held to a standard of negligence or intentional wrongdoing. But negligence means that you're using the care of the ordinary care of a reasonable person, and that's very subjective. And most of us in the cannabis industry are not reasonable people, at least the standard that the law uses. And so, what you might think is not negligence at all, it's like, well, no, you have a duty to make sure that you're behaving safely in your business. So, um, that's negligence is what leads to lawsuits. So, personal liability, again, this is harm that you specifically caused and is going to get you specifically sued. And sometimes it's written into statutes, but usually it's going to require some kind of egregious behavior, like, for example, stealing, hurting somebody, workplace violence, things like that, fraud. That's what's going to get you personally in trouble. And then when it comes to the accounting and financial liability, you do have some protection. We'll talk about with the limited liability entities, but it's just a matter of keeping track of who owes you money so you can go after them. Remember, like you need to get the money that's owed to you as well. This is part of protecting your business. And so this is where, you send the bill. And I recently had a client, God, it was somebody wasn't handing over the sales tax that they were supposed to give to him to pay to the state. And all he did was CC me on the email. And two emails in, they were like, all right, we'll send you the payment. It's like, that didn't cost him much for me because all I did was read a couple of emails. I didn't have to even reply. But, going after that money, CCing me, that got him paid. And then if you owe people, you got to stay on top of your bills or your business will get sued as well. We've got a lot of what happens in the cannabis industry depends on your reputation. So if you don't pay people, we got chat groups, we got Instagram, we got people out there that will report on those businesses to try and hold them accountable, even if they don't pay, then warning other people not to do business with potentially you. So um, pay your bills and get paid and keep records because the DCC, DCR, they require you to keep all these records. They require you to keep records of who you're doing business with. Even for the sales tax permits, when it comes to doing the seller's permit and getting that documentation from the people that are doing the resale part. It's a lot of record keeping and a lot of the regulations, like literally just record keeping is required and not record keeping has its own penalties and fines. And then taxes. Talked about taxes a lot already. Ooh, I'm not sure if you could see that. Oh, my image didn't show up. Sorry. We have a little headline here that's not appearing. I'm not sure why. Um, But the headline says the lawsuits are coming. And it's a headline from a legal publication, not a cannabis publication from 2024. And it basically just says that the biggest threat to cannabis businesses right now is civil liability and getting sued. So these are some of the things to worry about in more detail. So products liability. This is a very extensive and interesting area of the law. And this is because the products that you sell have to be safe. And it doesn't matter necessarily if you were negligent. This is one area of the law where if someone was hurt and you didn't warn them. Just warning, failing to warn someone. That's why you see all these warnings that seem so obvious and all these equipment. This chainsaw can cut your hand off. Yeah, yeah, okay. No, there are reasons that you see all these warnings because it happened. And so you kind of have to anticipate how people might misuse products. Now, in the cannabis industry, our labeling is very explicit in how we have to have certain warnings and how we have to list the test results and the amount of quantity in packages. So we're already dealing with that. But, if people get sick from eating your foods, then they could sue you. And this goes through the entire chain of distribution, meaning that if somebody buys an edible at retail, they don't just get to sue maybe the manufacturer who made it. They also get to sue the retailer who sold it, and they also get to sue the distributor who transported it, because each step in the chain of distribution is supposed to be taking care to make sure that customers will be safe. So products liability, you can get insurance for it, but the way that it works, it's a lot easier for products liability to be proven than like a slip and fall type situation. So that can get you into a lot of trouble. Now, as with cannabis, we're not quite there yet, but like we do have a lot of, BS lawsuits in the world. And so it's very easy to someone say, "Oh, I ate this edible and it made me sick." And cannabis can have negative effects. And we know that that's a person by person basis. It just depends, and doesn't mean it might not upset somebody and they want to sue you. So other liabilities that you may not consider, not be so aware of, but maybe see everywhere you go, which is, for example, statutory liabilities. These are very specific statutes that say if you do X, you can be held liable, and other people can sue you for this. And so Prop 65 is our cancer warning in California. And again, everywhere you go and everything is labeled with a Prop 65 warning, including cannabis. You need to be aware of the Prop 65 warning requirements. But there are law firms, and all they do is go to businesses to look to see if they've posted the warnings. And if they haven't, they file lawsuits against them. And that can end up costing you a lot of money. Other liabilities would be unfair business practices. So, if you are engaging in certain activity like fraudulent practices, businesses that compete against you, they can sue you. So you can get in trouble for criminal fraud. You can get in trouble for the people you committed the fraud against. But if the fraud enabled your business to have an unfair advantage, then the other businesses you can compete with can sue you as well. So then we have some things, that come up in the news a lot is data privacy. We have specific rules at the state and federal level on how you protect people's data. And a lot of cannabis businesses are collecting data. They're collecting maybe driver's license pictures. That's a really big deal. And then when privacy is breached, people get to sue you for that. And then discrimination in ADA laws. So discrimination, you have to treat everybody equally and fairly. And it's not just, you think maybe no employee discrimination, but there's also no customer discrimination. And you need to have ADA access for both employees and customers. And again, law firms are looking for these violations and going around and suing companies. And a lot of smaller businesses, they can't afford that. Some of the bigger businesses, the Burger Kings of the world, they should be on top of it. But for a smaller business, it can be quite devastating. And other employee protections like sexual harassment. And in California, we have a lot of laws of just paid time off, paid maternity leave, and things like that, that if you don't um, follow those laws, you can be sued. There are statutory liabilities in those laws that can get you in trouble. Some of the other things are just practical liabilities. So, like if you lose product, say your delivery truck overturns on the highway, and you lose all the product, that just is going to cost you money. You still got to pay for that, right? And then you could be the victim of fraud or theft or burglary. You still got to pay. And then the one that when we were going through Prop 64 and all the regulations that came afterwards, that just to me didn't really seem like a big deal. Like, when is this really going to happen? Was the disasters and declared emergencies and pandemics. And I mean, maybe just is the sign of the times, because that was 10 years ago, the first time I looked at the Prop 64 language, exactly January 2016. And it's like, oh, okay, fires, whatnot. But like since then, we've had the LA fires, specifically, all kinds of fires. We've had the flooding. And then, of course, we had a global pandemic nobody could have anticipated. And so those are going to cost you money, and you could get sued for not paying people. Now we have some disaster relief at the state level, but just things like shit happens, right? That's that category of things. And then if you're an employer, as I kind of mentioned already, first of all, you're liable for everything that your employees do. That's just part of the protections of being an employee. You're working for somebody else who controls the business, the situation, the tools, the equipment. If you negligently do something unintentionally, employees make mistakes. That happens. So your employees, you'll be liable for those mistakes. What I mean, like a pretty obvious one is like the employee was mopping the floor and didn't put the don't caution sign up and somebody slipped and fell. Well, yeah, no, that's an act of the business. And then between employers and employees, you have all the state and federal employment laws, and they're very strict and they have very serious penalties and fines. And those are some of the fines that can follow you personally. Um, the laws apply to not just people that work for you, but starting with the hiring process, starting with the job post. The job post has to follow certain requirements, and that's going to get into things like making sure you are not discriminating against potential applicants. And then when you fire people, of course, you can't fire them for certain reasons. So if you do, then you get sued. And then we have wage and hour laws. That's like minimum wage, overtime, the requirement to provide paycheck stubs. Those are per employee per day. They can rack up like $100,000 worth of fines in 1 month for a handful of employees. That one can put you out of business. And then OSHA is another one. The workplace has to be safe. Somebody gets hurt, OSHA is going to come after you. So all of these things can cost a lot of money. And just to kind of like give you the bigger picture here on employment law, like you see people can be employees or they can be contractors, and you see employers trying to classify people as contractors. That's because these laws don't apply to contractors. Contractors have their own business. And so this is why the Ubers of the world just hired people and did what they wanted and got sued because the way that they were behaving was these are employees and they weren't following the employee laws. Now, did Uber go and change the law? Yeah, they did. But this is why you see this discussion of employers versus independent contractors and why these businesses are getting in trouble. It's because they don't want to classify people as employees because of the cost. But it's not your choice how to classify someone, it's a legal definition. Let's see. I'm helping a nonprofit right now deal with the distinction between employees, contractors, and volunteers. There's no such thing as a volunteer in a for-profit business, just so you know. You do work, you get paid. And so how are we going to prevent against all of these liabilities, which are pretty serious, pretty scary, pretty damning? So the first way, this probably you're familiar with the concept of a limited liability company or a corporation. These exist for a number of reasons, but one main reason is to give the owners liability protections. And the other obvious way you protect yourself is through insurance. And there are all different types of insurance that you could get. And this has been a struggle for cannabis businesses, but more and more insurance companies are coming on board. And you're going to pay a lot. You're going to pay extra, you pay the cannabis premium like we do on everything, but it's really important. And in a lot of instances, you're required to have the coverage. Like when you apply for a license, you're required to show proof of insurance, or your landlord's going to require you to show proof of insurance. So there's other people that you're interacting with that are going to expect you to have that. So I mentioned general business liability, slips and falls, those types of things. Products liability is if someone gets injured or sick by using your products. And directors and officers, these are the leaders of the entities. You can get insurance for directors and officers as individuals. And again, it doesn't necessarily cover intentional wrongdoing, but a lot of times when people sue, they sue everybody. So the directors and officers can get additional insurance. Workers' compensation insurance, now that's for your employees. That's required. You have one employee, you have to have insurance coverage from them. There's the state fund, literally state fund, which is a program run through the state, and it's very affordable. But again, we're cannabis, so we always got a little bit of a surcharge on that. And then professional liability insurance is more so for the professionals in the cannabis industry. So people like myself, accountants, we have to have our own insurance. If you sue us, we need coverage. And I could tell you that in the cannabis industry, it's very hard for us to get insurance as well, and they charge us a lot more. That's my biggest expense as a cannabis attorney is my annual liability insurance, and it's my biggest fear. Everything I do every day, all day, is to keep my law license and to keep my insurance, because without those, I can't pay the rent. That's it. I'm done for. And I still got student loans that they're going to want me to pay. So then yeah, cannabis coverage, you can actually nowadays get coverage for losses of the cannabis, inventory losses, farm losses. So looking that's new and emerging, but it's out there and it's available. And then another way to protect you from liability is through basic intellectual property protections. And this is for people who you may want to sue and people who may want to sue you as well. So this is trademarks, copyrights, and in people's brands, their logos, and infringing on those. And it is pretty common in the cannabis industry. Everything is named Canna this, Canna that, Eva this, Itica that. And so you need to pick your name. And if you see somebody using your name, you have to act on that. You got to do your cease and desist order. If you don't act on it, it's your job to enforce it. You can lose your intellectual property protections. So, intellectual property filing for state or federal trademark, if you can get that, that's going to protect all of the value of your brand that is really what you're building here. Your brand, people knowing your brand recognition, and also reputation as well. Okay. So contracts. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but the biggest threat are your business partners. I'm just gonna put that out there. And that includes your brother or your best friend from high school, especially your girlfriend or boyfriend. Maybe not so much your husband and wife because there's laws that cover that. But I've done contracts between parents and their children for a cannabis business. And simply the idea of putting in writing makes it very clear for everyone, makes everybody know we're legit, we intend to follow through, we're professionals, this is a business, we're not messing around. Somebody doesn't want you to put it in writing, that's a red flag. That's a stop sign, not even a red flag. That's just a no-go. So this is where a lot of the equity folks are getting in trouble because you're being presented with documents that you don't necessarily understand, or you're being misled, or you're being rushed and not given the time to get proper legal advice. And those are all things that you can challenge in a lawsuit if there is a contract dispute. But you need the money to hire a lawyer to challenge them in a lawsuit. You need time. Lawsuits don't happen instantly. You can't stop or make somebody do something instantly necessarily. So
And
it's your
also, to that point, I would add that the lawyer that's in the room may not be, it probably is not your lawyer. They are a lawyer and they may be giving you advice, but they are not being paid by you, then they don't have your best interests at heart. They actually are representing your partner. And that's part of, if you could maybe touch on that a little, Lauren.
Yeah, so lawyers, we have very strict ethical requirements, and our duty goes to the client, but the client can be defined in a number of ways. So it could be one person, it could be a company, it could be partners, two people, it could be three people, it could be two businesses. I do all of those things, and I have to give out all kinds of disclaimers and waivers. And who does my interest go to? When it is one person, your best interest is all that I can care about. And when there's two people, it's your joint best interest. And if your interests conflict, I can't advise you on that. Y'all each got to go get your own attorneys. I can only advise you on what works for both of you. And sometimes it's the business and the people. And so I can't advise the people to take action in a way that would hurt the business. So it's got to be everyone's best interest, and it can get quite confusing. I talked to someone just last week, and they said that one of the partners themselves was an attorney, and so that attorney was purporting to explain everything, but he wasn't even the business's attorney, wasn't this person's attorney. He was nobody's attorney. He's just the expert in the room. But you know, they are supposed to make it clear because clients can sue lawyers. And even if you weren't a client, but you thought you were a client, you can sue the lawyer because it's the lawyer's job to make it clear you're not their client and what their duties are to you. So you can always ask. Who are you advising here? Are you advising me, Lauren Vasquez, or are you advising Cannabis Inc. And you'll get paperwork. You will sign attorney-client agreements in writing, and if you don't, that's what's going on? You're going to be my lawyer. Well, can we put it in writing? Absolutely. There are actually requirements from the state bar of certain types of client agreements, payment agreements, service agreements have to be in writing. So. That's a good one. Yeah, I got really mad at the lawyer in that conversation. The lawyer wasn't present, but I kind of went on my soapbox of like, oh man. So the other types of written agreements, leases, business agreements, a letter of intent, memorandum of understanding. Those are not quite contracts, but what it is it's showing your intent to do business together. And a lot of times that is what investors might want to see. You'll hear this, there's a letter of intent between X and OpenAI, and then they sued. Well, it's like, well, the letter of intent is maybe can go to the facts, and maybe somebody was misled, and then that can go to challenging the contract. But in and of itself, not necessarily a contract, but they are documents that you can use to make your intentions clear and make sure everybody's on the same page. And then a non-disclosure agreement, that's when you're talking with people, whether potential partners, potential investors, people that you'll work with who like are going to do formulations for you, who you're going to tell your secret growing techniques to. Just a standard non-disclosure agreement protects you if they disclose. Often in the non-disclosure agreement, there are specific damages laid out. If this gets disclosed, you're going to pay 10 grand. Because sometimes it's hard to calculate how much that actually costs. So oftentimes non-disclosure agreements, it'll be written right in there. And so the penalty is very clear. Keep those secrets, keep that confidential information confidential. Okay. So going to the limited liability entities, the whole point of these is to give people the security to go into business. If you were going to start a business and you could get sued and lose everything, lose your house, lose your savings, lose your other businesses, why would anybody take that risk? That's a little crazy. So we've got these limited liability entities that legally protect the owners, and the entity becomes its own individual under the law. This is why corporations are people. They are legal people. And as people, they do business in their own capacity. So that separates the owners from the business. And the business then is the one that takes on all the liabilities. If the business screws up, the business gets sued. And so the business is going to have its own bank account. It's going to have all the contracts are going to be in the business name. It's not going to be with you. It's going to be with the business. The lease needs to be in the business name. And then the business is going to protect you. Now, often personal guarantees are required in some of these things like leases. And that means you personally are taking on the liability of guaranteeing it, but that's extra. And usually required. But in order to have these protections, you have to manage your entity properly. Now, if you don't have a legal entity, you are either a sole proprietor or a general partnership. These are default business statuses. So you're one person and you start knitting baby caps and you sell them on Etsy. You're a sole proprietor, and nobody's going to sue you because they didn't like their baby cap. Okay. God, now the lawyer in me is like, oh, baby might choke on the cap and then sue you. Baby might strangle themselves. Okay. Maybe I need a non-baby example. You make purses, you sell purses, you knit purses, and you make purses and you sell them on Etsy. You're not going to get sued for that. You can be a sole proprietor. Sole proprietor is taking on all the liability of the business. You can lose everything. I'm a sole proprietor. I'll tell you why in a second. If there's more than one person, by default, you're a partnership. And partnerships, there are default laws that deal with how partnerships are, but you also can have a written partnership agreement. And that is definitely what you need. And that can start with a letter of intent when you and an NDA when you're first getting your discussions, and then you form your contract. And when I say put it in writing, that's any kind of writing. Of course, you want a formal contract, but a text message, an email that lays something out. Oh, okay, you're gonna pay me my by the 31st, $10,000 after I give you this. Okay, product delivered. Where's my payment? It's February 31st. Where's my payment? That is now written proof of a contract that's in existence, the terms of that contract, and actually breach of that contract, all in one there. So, if you're dealing with potential partners, those text messages, those emails, like I personally almost refuse to do phone calls with clients. My clients I know well, I'm not too worried about, but with other lawyers and other people, because I just want the written record, even if it's not a contract, and not just like to hold somebody else accountable, but just for my own memory, right? Or be able to forward, oh no, this is what I told you last month. Remember, you can't sue me because I told you that thing. And it's in writing. Yay. So when it comes to sole proprietors, you just manage your business, general partnerships, you have your partnership agreement. And then if you have a limited liability entity, there are strict laws on how you manage these things. So the two types of entities that you're going to probably already be familiar with are limited liability companies and corporations. And they have different ownership structures, and there's different pros and cons to them. But LLC is a lot more simple to manage and a lot easier to keep your limited liability protection. So maybe a sole proprietor might form an LLC, or maybe you and your business partner, there's two of you. The more people you have, if there's different ownership percentages and you want people to have different types of voting power, that's where a corporation comes in. But for both of these, the most important thing is that you have to actually treat it as a separate person. You cannot treat it as though it's just an alter ego of yourself. That's why you need it to have its own bank account and do business. It's going to buy all the business things from its own card. You're not going to use your personal bank card and then reimburse yourself. No, no, no. Just going to, the business is going to be separate from you. And then you have to treat it fairly. You can't break the rules. You can't break the law. So if you intentionally do something egregious as the owner, you can be personally sued and you will lose your protection. We call it the corporate veil, piercing the corporate veil. The corporate veil is protecting me from all the people trying to come at me with their lawsuits. But if you don't manage it correctly, they can pierce it and get right to you and sue you directly. So fraud, again, where you get like a lot of stockholder lawsuits and they're suing the directors and officers directly, or business disputes, where the business doesn't have any money but the owner's a billionaire, and they committed some sort of intentional fraud against you, like they misled you with the contract. They told you that the lawyer was here to advise you. Like, intentional misconduct can get you individually sued. Now, there is indemnification, which is a protection that the entity gives to the owners. If you do get sued, the corporation or the LLC is allowed to pay for your legal bills. That's just a protection because people do make mistakes, people do get individually named. But again, if you have like an egregious misconduct, intentional misconduct, the indemnification isn't going to protect you either. So, what I see a lot is people who go on LegalZoom and they form their entity and that's it. And first of all, if you can form your entity on LegalZoom or a website like that, you could do it yourself because they're not allowed to give you legal advice. It's a form. They ask you for the information to put in the one-page form, and then they copy and paste it. So the fact that you know the information to give it to them means you could fill out the form yourself. But that's just the form that gets you started with the state. There are follow-up filings, and then there's your governing documents. And this is like your shareholder agreement, your LLC operating agreement. These are the things that the DCR and DCC want to see that show your ownership percentages, that meet the requirements for the equity program. And so Um, a lot of people, they just file that one form, the articles. With a corporation, it's the articles of incorporation. With an LLC, it's the articles of organization. Now, another thing that is commonly thrown about is Delaware. You got to form your corporation in Delaware or Nevada. Nevada gets thrown out. Why? Oh, because it's easier and there's less taxes and it's cheaper and there's less rules. And it's like, do you do business in California? Are you in the cannabis industry and you can only do business in California? How about you set up your entity in California? California's going to tax you anyways, whether or not your business is set up here. We tax you on business conducted here. So you're going to get taxed at our rates anyways. Um, as far as LLC goes, you're going to pay an $800 flat fee every year. And if you make, I believe at this point it's above 250 in income, you're going to be taxed on that income above that. And the $800, again, people file the form with the state. They don't realize the $800 becomes due. They don't pay. And what happens is that your entity can be suspended. You can be suspended for not filing the annual or biennial form with the state of California, or paying the franchise tax board $800 fee. So when you are suspended, you lose your personhood and you can't do business legally. You can't sue somebody. And if you get sued, you can't legally defend yourself because you don't exist. They get a default judgment against you and then they come after you for the money that they just won because you couldn't defend yourself. And I run into this a lot. People I, will come to me and they've done the first step and they've already messed up and I'm already trying to save them money. And I go and look online. Okay, look it up. Oh, okay, yes, you filed this in 2022. Oh, it looks like you never paid your FTB tax. You were suspended in 2024. It's now 2026. And you gotta fix that because you don't you also like all your other filings like with the CDTFA and the city and the DCC, they're looking for these things. So um, and then there's not just the 800, then you get, charged fees and interest on top of that. So a lot of people get stuck with a suspended LLC or corporation in the cannabis industry. That's a way I actually check just to see if a company is on top of their stuff. Go to the Secretary of State's business search, put it in, check record. Did they file? Oh, I haven't filed a statement of information since 2018. Oh, okay, somebody's not paying attention. And sometimes it's just like they're not reminding you of these things. So often, even just for friends of mine, I'm like, oh, you didn't file your thing, file your thing. And it's a one-page form with the Secretary of State. It's like your owners' addresses, who are the owners, what are their addresses, and what's the business address, and who's your corporate agent. So um, you definitely need to not only set up but also manage your entity correctly so that you can have all of this liability protection. And just to be clear, LLC, a corporation, doesn't protect you from criminal liability. So with the cannabis laws, you're not going to be protected in from breaking criminal laws in that way from the feds or the state. Corporations are people who can't go to prison. You can. So it's not going to protect you from criminal liability. And we often don't even charge corporate directors and officers and CEOs with criminal actions of the companies. Like you can destroy the rainforest and go home at the end of the day with your bonus. Okay. So just a little bit more on the entities. This is the one-page form that you're going to fill out with the state of California. It's actually online. That's just the paper version. So as I said, the differences in the entities is how the ownership is structured, what the formal management requirements are. There's also different tax corporate implications. Just to clarify, an S corp and a C corp, those aren't types of corporations. Those are classifications of taxes, and an LLC can be taxed as an S corp. There's a lot more that goes into it. You're going to talk to a CPA about that. But I get a lot of people, oh, I want to set up an S Corp. No, you're not setting up an S Corp. You're setting up a Corp or an LLC that is taxed as an S Corp. So just on the language there, be aware of that. And yeah, when it comes to forming your entity in the cannabis industry, you really do want to use an experienced lawyer. It's going to save you money in the long run. You're not going to get charged every step of the way, like in these online things, and then not even be given advice, just be given forms to fill out and sent on your own, and then not warned about the tax or the follow-up filings, and then you get suspended and you're in trouble. So work with people who know what they're doing. And then just a note on DBAs, doing business as, your corporation or LLC, it's going to be named something generic and boring. And then you use a DBA, which is going to be your catchy name. That's your brand name. And one corporation or LLC can have multiple DBAs. So your business might have multiple licenses. You might have a cultivation license and a retail license, and it's under one corporation, but you use different DBAs to differentiate those brands, those products, and those companies. So that's where a DBA comes into play with your entity. So don't name your entity I Sell Weed Inc. It's a red flag for the feds, but also, generic means you can go anywhere with
It
it, right?
is. I would just want to underline that because there's been a shift. Years ago, we had always recommended to have a very boring ABC corporation name and use a DBA. That you are a red flag for everyone, from the bank to the tax, to be scrutinized by everyone that charges extra when they discover you're a cannabis facing business.
Yeah.
So the more you can just avoid that and make your life easier and not get kicked out of banks all the time,
Yeah.
not be scrutinized, not be audited just for the sake of your name. And trust me, they are savvy to the almost names too now. So,
Yeah.
you've really got to get super boring, like the street you grew up on, Inc. Um,
Just acronyms of all the partners, that's the initials of all the partners. And just to be clear, when you set up an entity, you are setting it up with the state, but a DBA is registered with the county of the business headquarters. And um, if your business headquarters isn't in California, which it will be, is Sacramento. So DBAs are 5 years and then you got to renew it. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And then your DBA is like also you're going to present that with your cannabis licensing applications because they're required. So you are going to need professionals, lawyers, CPAs. Of course, as participants in the equity program, the DCR does have the low and pro bono legal assistance. Make sure you take advantage of that. There are also lawyers who are coaches. So I don't do the lower pro bono legal work, but I am a coach. And so you can tap my brain. I'm not going to be able to give you legal advice, but I can talk to you about all of these things. The normal legal committee has a listing, just networking with people that you know in the industry and organizations. They're going to know the local lawyers on the ground that you're going to want to work with. Frankly, the local lawyers are going to be the leaders of the organizations. Um, and then we have the International Cannabis Bar Association that it has listings as well, and a lot of California attorneys. And then also we have state and county bar associations that have attorney listings, and some of those associations have lower pro bono legal assistance, even for businesses, not just things like family law or immigration, but also business support as well. So make sure you use all the resources that are available to you and get the professional assistance that you need. It's going to save you a lot of money and a lot of a lot of pain and suffering. And so as we wrap up here, all of these things, you have a dream, let's keep it alive. Don't lose your business, don't lose your license, don't get taken advantage of, don't get sued. We obviously don't want anybody going to jail anymore. And don't it is so hard, but don't get overwhelmed by the compliance. Just, one step at a time. Like I said, use like a daily checklist in your SOPs to keep track of these things. If you want one, I can send you one. Uh for free, no charge. Just a generic checklist that I have available. And you can turn it into your own however you like. uh, and then no, we don't want people getting hurt. You'll get in trouble for that. So make sure your products are safe and make sure you have insurance and you've put everything in writing. You're protected by a limited liability entity. And Godspeed to you all.
Indeed, this is not for the faint of heart, and thank you so much. Lauren Vasquez, attorney at law and cannabis attorney expert. Although, a friendly reminder, once again, not your attorney, and you always need to follow your local laws and municipal codes. I do want to invite any additional questions, and I do believe that the checklist that you're mentioning, something very similar, is available in the LMS as a
Thank you.
downloadable template. And I'll confirm that to make sure that if it's not, that we go ahead and make that happen on
I think I
behalf of
have a
BCR.
Google form template available that like
Yeah,
anybody could turn into their own Google form. I'd have to
perfect.
double check, but it's simple things like, did you change your address today? Did you move last week? Did you get a letter today in the mail? And you might think, oh God, we got this letter, and then you set it aside and forget. So just a tool, just a little hack to help people out.
That is so important. And yeah, making sure that your addresses are updated, your mailing address, if you have a different one. So often we have discovered, like, oh my goodness, the HR person changed the address to themselves and they're the one getting my mail and they haven't worked for me in 2.5 years. Oh no. So it's, yeah, the pain
Okay, in the
points are
LMS.
real
Perfect.
for small businesses. And it can feel like death by a thousand cuts. So every time I get a letter, dropping it into the calendar and making it recurring so that I'm not surprised next year. And setting those alerts and just having that, because as much as we want to say, well, I hired someone to do that for me, it always comes back to you, and you wind up having to unstick your stuck, because it's in your name. And so ensuring what you put your name on, from the get-go, is critical. And I'm curious, as we exit, just one question in particular, as far as like what you're seeing as a compliance expert here in California, especially with respect to some of the fines and penalties that are compounding on people that are, in some cases, years old and shocking. Is there anything that folks can do to either appeal those, or something obvious that keeps happening that you can say, don't step in that poo?
There's a lot. It's hard to narrow it down. Um, hmm. Well, there are required procedures before you can be fined and penalized, and there are appeal procedures and opportunities. But once you have a fine levied against you, an important thing to understand about the law, it's not like, oh, but well, at this. It's like, was it ABC? It was ABC. You're fine. So um, I would, God, man, that's a difficult question to answer because there's just so much. But I would say the thing that I see with everybody, not just cannabis businesses, is allowing an entity to become suspended, and it costs money and time, and every moment that you're suspended, it means your business and you are vulnerable. And it's just so common. So LLCs have to uh, file their report every other year. Corporations are every year. If you don't file the report, you could be suspended. That's so easy to happen. And then if you don't pay the 800, you could be suspended. That's every year. And the Secretary of State, you used to get away with 5 or 6 years. Now it's more like every year they're monitoring it and catching up. And it's just because it's not just necessarily that they want the money, it's just that there's all these entities on the books that aren't actual businesses. And so they're just trying to clear it out. And with the Franchise Tax Board, they do have a process for you to revive. And they will work with you on like a payment plan, or that you can talk to those people and see what you could get. But that's the most common thing I see across the board. It's just neglecting your entity.
What a great point. And I'm glad that you brought up, when you contact them, they'll often just talk you through and walk you through what next steps are. It's just their job, their 9 to 5. They're not out to get you. But they do have to follow the letter of the law and the letter of the rules. And it's often not even the entity that you're talking to that made those rules. So being kind to that person helps. It is also about opening the mail the first time you get it and not setting it aside, because that first mail, you may still have a chance to appeal or say, wait a minute, that's not, but if you wait until the third letter, it's the fine's already been levied.
Yeah, what I do see is there's a notice and there's a opportunity to correct, and most people are correcting, and I'm not seeing, huge fines being levied against those people because they just want to work with you. The agencies want to work with you.
Right on.
So don't neglect the agencies either.
Yes, indeed. And that is a great segue to the last thing that I want to say. Again, as a small business owner myself, I take advantage of many of the free trainings that California, the state, as well as the city of Los Angeles offer. For instance, as a manager, I'm required to take 2 hours of anti-harassment training, and I don't have to pay a trainer to do that. The Honestly, it's really pretty good. They've got like David Schwimmer doing acting gigs on the anti-harass. I was like, wait a minute, is that David Schwimmer harassing that girl? Yes, it was. So they've got
Ross,
class A actors as well in these
nice
videos.
LA.
So yeah, it's really not bad, and it's free, and you're able to complete that training. And it's not just for anti-harassment. That training is available from all of the agencies. And so yeah, it's painful, but what's more painful is not getting the training, not getting the help, and getting the fines and levies, or worse, losing your license and the ability to pay those fines and levies. So, with that, this has been just super fantastic. Thank you, Lauren
Thank you,
Vasquez.
everyone.
Thank you, and thank you all for attending this informative webinar, which was offered and brought to you by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation's Social Equity Program, although the information was not produced by them. This webinar recording will soon be available on DCR's website, cannabis.lacity.org. And if you have any questions on accessing your LMS account or any other questions, you can also email dcr.sep@lacity.org. You can also still get professional business coaches, just like Lauren Vasquez, to talk with you one on one. These are expert consultants dedicated to helping you and your business succeed and get unstuck. And with that, my name is Dale Sky Jones. I want to thank you again with Oaksterdam University. We are so grateful for your time and attention today. Thank you for joining us. I hope the rest of your day is even better than the last. Take good care.